Imagine struggling to breathe and suddenly, without warning, your oxygen tank gets cut off. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, that nightmare became my reality when an HOA Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. I had no idea that a routine day would turn into a fight for my safety and my life. It all started when this woman, who clearly thought she had the power to make decisions for everyone, came to my door. I've always kept things respectful with the HOA, but what she did crossed a line. In a fit of arrogance, she disconnected my oxygen tank, putting me at risk of serious health complications. She didn't seem to care one bit about the consequences. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I realized it was more than just a mistake. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple act of negligence. It was an intentional move that endangered my life. And guess what? That's exactly why she ended up being arrested. But the twists didn't stop there. What happens next? How did the whole situation unfold? You won't believe the shocking details I'm about to share, so stay tuned to see what happened when this Karen faced the consequences of her actions. It wasn't the first time I had run into issues with the HOA. There were always complaints, too many weeds in my yard, the wrong color of paint on the mailbox, things like that. But I had always done my best to follow the rules, even if some of them felt a little ridiculous. I'm not the type to cause trouble, but this was different. This was personal. I'd never had a problem with this particular woman before. She'd always struck me as a bit too eager to enforce every single little rule. You know the type, the self-appointed enforcer who thinks their job is to make sure everyone else is following every rule to the letter. But I never imagined she would take it this far. When she knocked on my door that morning, I had just finished setting up my oxygen tank. I rely on it for my breathing, and without it, things can get really dangerous really fast. She stood there, all smiles at first, talking about some vague issue with the HOA regulations. But then, just as I was starting to explain that I had everything under control, she walked right past me, toward the tank, and disconnected it without saying a word. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? The moment felt surreal, like time had frozen, and all I could think about was the air that I could no longer breathe. It wasn't the first time I had run into issues with the HOA. There were always complaints, too many weeds in my yard, the wrong color of paint on the mailbox, things like that. But I had always done my best to follow the rules, even if some of them felt a little ridiculous. I'm not the type to cause trouble, but this was different. This was personal. I'd never had a problem with this particular woman before. She'd always struck me as a bit too eager to enforce every single little rule. You know the type, the self-appointed enforcer who thinks their job is to make sure everyone else is following every rule to the letter. But I never imagined she would take it this far. When she knocked on my door that morning, I had just finished setting up my oxygen tank. I rely on it for my breathing, and without it, things can get really dangerous really fast. She stood there, all smiles at first, talking about some vague issue with the HOA regulations. But then, just as I was starting to explain that I had everything under control, she walked right past me, toward the tank, and disconnected it without saying a word. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? The moment felt surreal, like time had frozen, and all I could think about was the air that I could no longer breathe. I tried to speak, to stop her, but my chest was already tightening. Panic started to creep in. She stood there, arms crossed like she'd done nothing wrong, like she hadn't just put someone's life in danger. I reached for the backup oxygen, hands shaking, heart racing. Thankfully, I managed to hook it up in time, but the damage was done, not just physically, but mentally too. Later, when I finally caught my breath, literally, I called a friend who lives in the neighborhood. I needed someone to confirm that what had just happened wasn't normal. When I told him, he was stunned. He said she'd been going around the community lately, acting more aggressive than usual, complaining to residents, threatening fines, even entering people's property without permission. I wasn't the only one she had a problem with, but I was the first she'd put in real danger. A neighbor across the street had caught part of the incident on her security camera. She showed me the footage, grainy but clear enough to see Karen disconnecting the tank. That video became everything. I reported it, not just to the HOA board, but also to the police. That's when things got even weirder. Suddenly, people were showing up at my house. Some supportive, others clearly sent to intimidate me. Was someone trying to silence me? Or was this just the start of something bigger? A few days after filing the police report, things started to feel off. My mail went missing. I'd hear footsteps outside my window late at night, but no one would be there when I looked. Then came the anonymous notes, slipped under my door, tight, no signature. Stuff like, asterisk, you're making this worse for yourself. Asterisk at first, I thought maybe I was just paranoid, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't ignore it. Karen, meanwhile, was still walking around the neighborhood like nothing had happened. She'd wave at people, tend to her garden, and even hosted an HOA meeting as if she hadn't just nearly caused a medical emergency. The board was silent. Not one word about what she did. That's when I realized she had connections. People who either supported her or were too afraid to speak up. The neighborhood started to split. Some folks came by to thank me for standing up, telling me their own stories, harassment, fines, even threats over tiny things. Others wouldn't make eye contact. A couple even told me to drop it, that going after her would bring the wrong kind of attention. But I wasn't backing down. Then, one night, someone tried to tamper with my oxygen tank again, this time while I was asleep. If it weren't for a noise that woke me up, I don't know what would have happened. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a tank anymore. It was about power control and what someone like Karen would do to protect it. After the second tampering attempt, I was done taking chances. I installed security cameras around my house, every angle covered. I started documenting everything, calls, strange noises, even the smallest interactions with Karen or anyone from the HOA. I didn't want to believe it, but the situation felt like it was spiraling into something bigger than just a neighborhood dispute. This felt calculated. Then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, the real twist hit. A former HOA board member, someone who had moved out of the community months ago, reached out to me after hearing about what happened. He told me that Karen had been warned before, that she'd crossed boundaries in the past, that the HOA had actually tried to quietly remove her, but she used legal threats and connections to keep her position. And get this, there was talk of her having access to confidential medical and personal information about residents, things no HOA board member should ever have. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't just about me or my oxygen tank. Karen had a pattern, and now I had proof that she was more than just a power-hungry neighbor. She was someone who'd been playing a dangerous game for a long time. But the more I uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. My phone started glitching. A hard drive disappeared from my desk, and then came a knock at the door, not from the police, not from a neighbor, but someone I'd never seen before. I opened the door slowly, heart pounding, camera still rolling from earlier. The man standing there wore a plain jacket, no badge, but he flashed credentials. Private investigator. He said he'd been hired by a family a few blocks over who had also filed a complaint against Karen. Apparently, their disabled son had faced similar interference with his medical equipment, and they suspected foul play. When they heard what happened to me, they wanted answers too. We sat down and compared notes. The pattern was undeniable. Karen had targeted multiple residents with health conditions, always under the excuse of violating HOA regulations. But it wasn't about rules, it was about control. And now, with video footage, statements, and the investigator's report, we had a solid case. I handed everything over to the authorities, including the footage of the second tampering attempt. This time, the police acted fast. Karen was arrested for endangering life and criminal negligence. The community finally saw what she was capable of, and people started speaking out. But just when I thought it was over, the investigator called me one last time. They'd found something strange, an encrypted folder on Karen's old HOA-issued laptop. Inside were photos, addresses, and private notes on several residents, including me. Somehow, she had access to medical histories and personal records no one should have had. Turns out, Karen wasn't acting alone, and that's a story for another day. After Karen's arrest, the HOA was forced to do a full investigation. What they found shocked everyone. She'd been abusing her access to sensitive resident information for years. Several board members either resigned or were replaced, and new policies were put in place to protect medical privacy and prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. As for me, it took a while to feel safe again. The cameras stayed up, and I made sure my oxygen system was fully secured. But the biggest change came from the community itself. Neighbors who had once stayed silent started checking in more. People talked more openly, and for the first time in a long time, there was real unity. We weren't just a group of houses, we were people who had finally come together. Looking back, I still can't believe how far things went just because one person let power go to their head. But the experience taught me how important it is to speak up, especially when others can't. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And no one, no matter their title or authority, should be allowed to put lives at risk. Thanks for sticking with me through this. Stay aware, stay safe, and never let fear keep you quiet.